How many Mr. Pickles will it get? Let's see if this cabinet has what it takes.
Video Game Vegas.
He's so cute.
Friends, Video Game Vegas. And this is my review of the Arcade1Up Atari Deluxe 12-in-1 arcade cabinet. I base my arcade cabinet reviews on 10 categories, which you'll find detailed in the text below. For each positive in a category, or more positive than negative in a category, I'll score it a Mr. Pickle. The more Mr. Pickles it gets, of course, the better. Based upon the total score and my overall thoughts, I'll recommend if you should get it, vet it, or in other words, put it through its paces in person before you buy, or forget it. A couple of disclaimers before I get into my review. All my product reviews are based solely upon the item or items I receive. Some may get the same product and have no issues. Some may have more issues than I did. And maybe I get no issues at all, my hope for any product. Or maybe a majority of the specific product performs or presents differently than the one I got. But when it comes down to it, what I get is what I review. I don't acquiesce to excuses like, I must have gotten a bad one, or a good one, or ruminate shipping issues if I had it shipped, though I may note something. But plainly put, I'm an advocate for good quality with a strong emphasis towards quality control. And if a company wants their product seen favorably, then they need to make this a paramount part of their philosophy and put it to action, so what every customer receives is an acceptable, if not preferred, exceptional experience every time. Some may think it unfair not to put a more significant emphasis on the law of averages, and I appreciate that opinion. But my reviews are meant to tell my experience on exactly what I got, good or bad. Second, the footage presented in my videos of arcade cabinets I review or showcase may contain updated parts, decorations, software, or other bits and bobs not included in a standard purchase. Please make sure to check advertised listings or reach out to retailers to confirm complete contents in box. Now let's get to it. When Arcade1Up first came onto the scene, it changed what I thought was possible. I never thought I could have an actual arcade in my house. Original commercial arcade machines, to me, were just too big, too heavy, sometimes too expensive, though some can be found on the cheap, and often required a level of upkeep that I wasn't interested in. The main way I got my arcade fix at home was on a blank canvas generic emulation cabinet. Arcade1Up came along and totally flipped the switch, with the idea of an arcade machine, 3/4 scale size of an original, light and small enough so you could fit several in the average room of a house, plug and play, after you put them together of course, all licensed and branded to look like the arcade games I remembered, with no messing around with setting up controller and button layouts, or downloading and configuring software, and all at a consumer-friendly price. It blew my mind. And unlike many generic emulation cabinets on the market, each Arcade1Up cabinet would come with unique control schemes tailored to play the included games, experiencing them like they were in the arcade. As Arcade1Up touted it, an arcade experience at home with real feel controls. In the beginning, Arcade1Up offered 4 machines to choose from. Well, 5 if you count Final Fight, but that one would come out much later. The 4 machines you could pre-order were Asteroids, Centipede, Street Fighter II Championship Edition, and Rampage. Each included 4 games, except for Street Fighter II, which only had 3 games, and at a pre-order price between $250 and $300, depending on where you pre-ordered them from. I think Arcade1Up's intended retail price was a bit higher, but when the stores listed them, they were at these lower prices. I seriously wanted to buy them all, but do prefer a company to earn my trust before I just purchase something, especially since I had been recently burned by another home arcade product. but the hype was real, folks. And against my better judgment, I ended up pre-ordering one. I was still proud I didn't buy them all, but there was that little voice in the back of my head that kept saying, wait for some positive reviews. Now came the hard part. Which one to choose? I would have loved to have the Street Fighter II Championship Edition machine, but I already had its generic control setup on an emulation cabinet I owned, 2 joysticks with 6 action buttons on each side, well, actually 7 action buttons on each side on mine, with an extra button mimicking a placement for Neo Geo Play. And I also didn't like the lack of value proposition for me on that one. It only included 3 games, when its control scheme could have easily handled so many other Capcom titles properly as well, so I nixed that one. I also really wanted to have the Rampage machine, as it had a 3-player configuration, but after reading the size dimensions of the cabinet, I couldn't imagine 3 people playing comfortably around it, so I passed on that one as well. The real hard choice came down to Centipede and Asteroids. I love me some Centipede, but the Asteroids machine came with Tempest, and I loves me some Tempest just a titch more. And the Asteroids cabinet had what looked to be a sweet, sweet spinner to control all that cool Tempest action, so I pre-ordered that one. Man, it was a hard decision, because the Centipede cabinet came with a trackball, and though I've always had fun playing Centipede at home with a mouse, I longed for the days to play it again with an actual trackball. But if the Asteroids machine turned out great, I'd pick up Centipede next. But then the stars really aligned. Before any of the cabinets released, Fry's, a large electronics store, put up a listing for an Arcade1Up cabinet called the Atari Deluxe 12-in-1. Not only did it come with all the games included on both the Asteroids and Centipede cabinets, total 8 games between the two, but it came with 4 additional games, bringing the total roster of games up to 12. And that's not all. It also came with both of their control schemes as well, a spinner and a trackball. The price for the Atari Deluxe 12-in-1 was steeper. Fry's was charging $499 for it, and for that I could buy both the Asteroids and Centipede machines. But the additional 4 games included, and having all the controls on one cabinet, smaller footprint, and it also came with an included riser to bring the controls up to stand-up height, made it a value proposition for me. So I canceled my Best Buy Asteroids order and pre-ordered the Atari Deluxe 12-in-1 from Fry's. The wait was almost unbearable. Visions of playing these classic games again swam through my head as I scoured the internet for any piece of information I could find before launch. This is where I happened upon a YouTuber called Cool Toy, who reported Arcade1Up information, everything he could find, and took time out to have conversations in his comment sections. He even posted a deal for the Atari Deluxe 12-in-1 before launch at Best Buy for $399. I took full advantage of that, canceling my Fry's order and getting the Best Buy deal. But would the Atari Deluxe 12-in-1 still be worth it at $399? Let's find out. The look of the cabinet. Man, I couldn't get enough of the artwork, looking at it every day online. And although Arcade1Up's individual Centipede and Asteroids cabs had more arcade-accurate artwork representation to their respective machines, I'd played combo cabs in the arcade before, many with split or collage artwork, and I liked Arcade1Up's take on it. But when I finally got the cabinet in my hands, not good. Though the artwork itself was the same as the advertisements, mine came with large scratches on the Centipede side and various scuffs and smaller scratches throughout. Not acceptable for a brand new product, and it ruined the whole presentation for me. And just a quick note, the box it came in was in fairly good condition, and although the art on the box was scuffed up quite a bit, there were no significant signs of external shipping damage. I did like the logos of the games printed on the kickplate, which I know some prefer the faux coin doors Arcade1Up chooses to use on some of their newer cabs, but I wish Arcade1Up would do both. put a faux coin door on one side and the game logos on the other so the customer can choose with a flip. Cabinet structure and assembly. I have to hand it to Arcade1Up and congratulate them on this most brilliant design of the 3/4 scale size cabinets. They may be made from lighter materials, but man are they sturdy. Sans the surface damage I mentioned before, of course. And I have to stand up and applaud Arcade1Up for choosing a two-piece design, a main cabinet and a separate riser to make it taller. Both the lightweight materials and separate piece design makes the machine manageable to move, and I can't thank Arcade1Up enough for this ingenious decision. I wish I could say everything was all roses in this category though, but we have to talk about the cabinet assembly. This, my friends, was a sheer nightmare. But let me back up a moment. Before I received the cabinet, I came across a video of someone who received an Arcade1Up cabinet with a monitor displaying some dead pixels and a spinner that wouldn't work consistently. The suggestion was, don't put the cabinet together before testing the controls and the monitor first. I did just that when I got mine. I only hooked up the monitor and the control panel with some power and tested the main components. To my dismay, my monitor, my brand new monitor, had some stuck pixels. Absolutely unacceptable. And what's worse, the stuck pixels were bright green, so you can imagine how they stood out among the black backdrop of asteroids. Well, gray backdrop, but we'll get to that later. Now I should have been smart and ignored the bright orange sticker that came affixed to the monitor saying, "Do not take back to the store and contact Arcade1Up instead." But I was dumb. Suffice it to say, I contacted Arcade1Up and it would take them 8 weeks to resolve all the issues I reported on the cabinet. So 8 weeks my cabinet stayed unassembled until I received all the replacement parts. Now let's get to putting it together. Like I said, it was a sheer nightmare. As easy as IKEA my ass, wooden dowels are for the birds, and trying to align each peg from flopping pieces onto many holes on the second side panel is rage-inducing. Luckily, my brother helped me with the build because I probably would have given up. Physical controls. The buttons and the trackball are nice, though the buttons are a bit clickier than I like. Still preferred over what Arcade1Up uses on some of their newer cabs. But the radio dial to play spinner games is a joke. How anyone could ever cheap out on something so essential to the experience is beyond me. Real feel? More like real steal my money. It didn't spin because it wasn't the spinner. It clicked, and it wouldn't respond sometimes. This pretty much alone squashed my dreams of building my own home arcade. Except Glenn's Retro Show to the rescue. Looking at the machine in my video, if you're familiar with how the original Atari Deluxe 12-in-1 looked, you'll notice that mine has an actual spinner. Glenn, from Glenn's Retro Show, created a replacement spinner that works on this cabinet so games like Tempest could be played properly. My review is only focused on what you get from Arcade1Up, so my current spinner replacement isn't factored in this review, but I wanted to mention it because getting one is essential if you want to play spinner games on this cabinet. And something else to mention about the control panel is the artwork on it. When light testing the machine, I started noticing small scratches around the spinner because my fingernails would touch the panel during play. Many people were reporting artwork damage on their control panels because the application of the art was of poor quality. I have to give Arcade1Up credit though. They came up with a plexiglass overlay solution for their control panels that now comes standard on their newer cabinets to protect the art. Please see adverts to know which ones do. They sent me one for free with a new art overlay to cover my existing damaged art. However, if you do acquire one of these Atari Deluxe 12-in-1 cabinets, just know that Arcade1Up no longer provides these free plexi overlays. I should also mention, Arcade1Up themselves no longer produces this machine. But if you do happen upon a new one by other means, Just know that it won't come with the Plexi control panel overlay in the box. Picture quality. As I mentioned before, dead or stuck pixels on a brand new monitor are unacceptable, and I had to get mine replaced on this Atari Deluxe 12-in-1 because of it. On top of stuck pixels, Arcade1Up led me to believe that space is not black, but is instead gray. At least on this monitor, it's pretty washed out. But what stinks, especially if you want to put it in an arcade with machines that have good monitors, is it'll stick out like a sore thumb. The monitor becomes extremely washed out if you walk away from it. And another bonus I should mention is the plexiglass bezel that covers the monitor was mired with hundreds of micro scratches, like someone took sandpaper and rubbed it all over it. This is something that I had Arcade1Up support replace as well, but even the replacement, though not as bad, still had issues with many micro scratches. Sound. Acceptable, even with it coming from a small speaker in the control deck. It has 3 volume settings, off, low, and high, which I wish there were more levels, but it gets the job done. My only gripe is, there is a slight sound delay when playing Centipede. It's not enough to take me out of the experience, and barely noticeable, but it is there. Games and gameplay. The games included on this cabinet are Asteroids, Major Havoc, Lunar Lander, Tempest, Gravatar, Asteroids Deluxe, Centipede, Missile Command, Crystal Castles, Millipede, Liberator, and Quantum. I played every game on this list on their original arcade hardware, except for Liberator. Reviewing just the games themselves, the way they originally play on original hardware or good emulation, I like 11 out of the 12 games, with Gravatar never being a favorite of mine. Now when it comes to playing these games on the Atari Deluxe 12-in-1, 8 of the 12 games play like you'd expect them to, using the Arcade1Up controls included. However, if you're like me, and one of the 4 games that don't play well is a favorite, or if one of the main reasons you bought the cab was to play one of the 4 games that have issues, then you're in for some disappointment. Tempest and the other spinner game, Major Havoc, are borderline unplayable, or at the very least, not fun at all to play with the included dial controller. It should be noted though, both of these have an alternative movement control scheme via digital buttons, but that control method is crap as well. This alone tells me Arcade1Up knew their dial controller wasn't up to the task playing these games properly. Quantum, a trackball game, is the only trackball game that doesn't play right. It seems like the correct sensitivity wasn't programmed in, making it also unenjoyable. Lunar Lander is the odd one for me, as it's the only game on the cabinet missing one of its main controls, an analog throttle for thrust. And though I did have some fun playing it, the digital button isn't a good replacement because it can't replicate precise thrust controls. Customer support. A painful process. The people I eventually got to work with were awesome, but the process to get to them, the inability to track progress, and the time it took to get my issues resolved weren't so. If my problems could have been resolved without taking 2 months, a week would have been acceptable, maybe 2, but that's pushing it. I would have given them a positive here. But in hindsight, I wish I would have taken the machine back to the store and exchanged it. Other annoyances beyond what I've already discussed? Though I won't dock it a Mr. Pickle in this category, as it's more of a ponderance of why, I have to wonder Arcade1Up's reasoning behind including a game completely void of an attempt to physically simulate its original control scheme. With all the care to make sure that each game received a physical control type that attempted to match what each game required, why was Lunar Landers not? Arcade1Up could have added something like an up and down fader arm control, like you'd see on a video editor, but nothing. there definitely seems to be room on the control panel for something like that. How one could have thought a digital button was a good replacement for analog controls is beyond me. Well, I guess not. It was probably the same thought process that went into thinking a clicky radio dial was a good substitution for a spinner. Is the cabinet fun? For the majority of the games, I had fun with this cabinet, but I didn't get what I overall paid for. Some fun, yes, but for me, it leans slightly more to the negative, as Tempest, out of the box, is a wash. Value for price. If we're talking just the amount of quality titles to unique controls included on the Atari Deluxe 12-in-1, then $3.99, heck, $4.99 is a good deal. But we're not just talking about that. Function and presentation also play a huge role in this. With the myriad of issues I mentioned, I wouldn't recommend this cabinet even at $99, unless you decide to add Glenn's Retro Show spinner to it and don't care about Lunar Lander or Quantum and don't mind all the other quality issues I've mentioned. So adding up the tally of all the categories, how many Mr. Pickles does Arcade1Up's Atari Deluxe 12-in-1 cabinet get? 2 Mr. Pickles out of 10. Forget it. Though the concept is stellar, the priority to cut corners shows a real lack of reverence for these games. They deserve better. For those who would like to see more of what this cabinet looks like, I'm paying it forward and leaving a link to a video I've enjoyed in the past showcasing it. And with that, safe travels everyone. And remember, you always have a right to your opinion, but only I have a right to mine. Until next time, stay wiggly, my friends.